Hello and welcome to the 2017 Personal Health Summit. If you're looking to become healthier and happier than you've ever been before, then you've come to the right place. The Personal Health Summit features an international collaboration of leading doctors, scientists, researchers, and health ambassadors, all working to change the conversation and transform world health. Every expert here is to share with you their knowledge, wisdom, and expertise to help you learn, grow, and become empowered to make informed choices and take control of your health and your life. Our mission, first and foremost, is to help you recognize that you are unique, that there are many different avenues to achieving and maintaining optimal health, and that there is one that's right for you at this very moment in time. Being informed is being empowered. And when you have the right information, you have the power to change your health, your happiness, and your life. The Personal Health Summit is made possible by the generous support of the Ultimate Human Foundation, who's committed to educating and empowering people all over the globe to be proactive about their personal health, providing truly personalized health solutions for every human being on the planet with accessibility and affordability, and orchestrating and nurturing a global gathering of the world's key health experts and thought leaders at the vanguard of their respective fields, where solutions can be found to transform the future health of humanity. The Personal Health Summit is also made possible by PH360.me, the world's most advanced health assistant that interacts with you via your smartphone, just like a best friend who can calculate the best nutrition and lifestyle choices to most favorably and easily influence your unique hormones, genes, and personal state of health, empowering you to make easy, accurate lifestyle decisions to improve your sleep, energy, mood, weight, digestion, and well-being. Now on to today's guest. Todd Caldecott has been in practice as a medical herbalist and practitioner of Ayurveda for over 2 decades, working with a variety of conditions including autoimmune disease and metabolic disorders. He's a registered professional member with both the American Herbalist Guild and the National Ayurvedic Medical Association, and serves as director of Dogwood School of Botanical Medicine. He's the author of Ayurveda, The Divine Science of Life, Food as Medicine, and co-editor of Ayurveda in Nepal. For the last 10 years, Todd's worked closely with an 800-year-old hereditary lineage of traditional Ayurvedic practitioners based in Kathmandu, Nepal. You can find out more about Todd at toddcaldecott.com. Todd, thank you so much for joining us here live on the Health Lounge today for an incredible chat all about Ayurveda and Buddhism and food as medicine. Todd, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's jump into finding out a little bit about some of the basics here. What is Ayurveda and why, for our health and well-being, is it important for us to understand that and apply this wisdom?
Well, the Ayurveda specifically is the ancient teaching from India on health and wellness. It is probably the oldest continuously practiced system of medicine in the world. And that term continuously practiced, I think, is really important because there are ancient systems of medicine around, but it doesn't mean that they're been practiced for all that long or are continuously practiced. So we have this ancient tradition, this empirical tradition that goes back generation after generation after generation for thousands of years, where people have been following the recommendations of Ayurveda and vetting them to see if they work, fine-tuning them, learning about their bodies. The most important thing to understand about Ayurveda, even though I think most people would associate it with all things India, the fact that it evolved in India, I think, is important to make note of. But India also isn't a monolith. India is comprised of many different cultures, many different languages, many different climatic zones and regions. So it's really hard to generalize about what India is, and in that same way, it's hard to generalize about what Ayurveda is. There's many different aspects to it. There's different specializations. But the most important thing I think to understand about Ayurveda and understanding why it exists is that it came about thousands of years ago when humans left off their hunter-gatherer ways and began to live in settled communities and began to get chronically ill, began to get unwell. And so there were some things that we needed to learn about how to live together in settled communities, in so-called civilized society, how to survive and how to thrive in that environment. And Ayurveda exists for that purpose. The most important concept to understand about Ayurveda probably is that Ayurveda exists to support the understanding and the manifestation of something called dharma. And dharma can mean many different things in different contexts. In Buddhism, it means something specifically. It refers to the teachings of the Buddha. In Hinduism, it refers to a set of practices that are followed. to maintain the balance between the good forces and the chaotic forces of the universe. But in Ayurveda specifically, dharma refers to the natural way of things, or the natural law. And so when we practice Ayurveda, what we're trying to do is attune ourselves to natural rhythms and cycles. Because you made a comment earlier in your introduction about perfect health, and from a Buddhist perspective, from the perspective of Ayurveda, there isn't such a thing as perfect health because we live in a world of constant change. So everything is constantly changing. But Ayurveda gives you the tools to understand how things change, how to anticipate change, and how to navigate through that change so that you can ameliorate all those myriad numbers of effects, including things like aging, climate, stress, and family, all these different things that affect us. Ayurveda gives these tools, and it's all about mimicking or emulating these natural rhythms in nature. And essentially, they are our inspiration. Just like as the sun rises, it transits through the sky and sets. Our digestion is modeled on that. So if we understand that, then, for example, it doesn't make sense to eat a lot at nighttime when the sun is set on the horizon, because we're lacking that fiery property that the sun gives us when it's transiting over our skies. And likewise, why our digestion is probably at its strongest at midday. And that's why that's a really good time to be eating most of your food, or at least eat a very good meal. A lot of people living in this 24/7 industrialized society are out of touch with those natural rhythms. And so, they'll eat at any random time. They'll stay up late and eat big meals and wonder why, they're lacking in energy, or why they've got, autoimmune reactions, or why they've got a myriad number of health issues, because they're kind of disconnected from these natural rhythms and cycles, which are meant to inform and guide us.
Thank you, Todd, for that great introduction on Ayurveda, and it's really great to hear the understanding and the adaptive environments we live in, and our bodies are under constant stress, and it's how we adapt to those and how we can be aware of those. And I love the message that you bring here. And I'm interested, Todd, how did you get into doing what you're doing today? How did you become an Ayurvedic practitioner, and why did you go down this path?
Well, I think I've been interested in health for a long time, even as a child. And it wasn't until actually I had spent a year traveling around in India. I was a former film and television actor, and I still was at that time. And I decided I didn't like that industry, and I wanted something different. So I went to India, and I spent a year traveling around on the cheap. I was traveling around on about $2,000 for a year. And that was 30 years ago, so that's more money than it is now. But even still, it's not that much money. And needless to say, I couldn't really live like an Indian. I got really sick. I got both amoebic and bacillary dysentery. I survived. I did make it home a year later, but I was losing a lot of weight. I just had chronic digestive problems. And I had sought treatment with a number of different practitioners, including modern medicine, naturopathic medicine, Chinese herbal medicine. Nothing seemed to be effective until I met a physician of Ayurveda. And it was his simple recommendations over a very short period of time, maybe a month and a half, that I was able to begin to restore my health. And so I began to study with him. And after I completed my training with him, or rather while I was happening, I also enrolled in a 3-year clinical program in herbal medicine. And then when I finished my training, I went to India to follow up with that. And so I've been in practice since 1996.
Wow, what a fascinating journey, and thanks for sharing that with us today, and for sharing all the information you are today with us. You're here live on the Health Lounge with Todd Caldecott. We're discussing Ayurveda and Buddhism and everything else in between. So Todd, just going through the understanding of Ayurveda compared to Western medicine at the moment. So what wisdom is these ancient medicines and teachings bringing us in today's society when we refer to the understanding of the body and health and disease?
Well, there's so many things. I think there's sometimes confusion around causation in Western medicine. Often in Western medicine, when we attribute a cause to something, it's a mechanism, it's a specific mechanism. It could be, faulty gene expression or a failure of a certain organ. But Ayurveda views causation a little bit differently. Causation usually relates to things that we do with our bodies, behaviors that we engage in, which include lifestyle and diet. So almost, all disease has its origin. Not all disease, almost all disease has its origin in our diet, in our lifestyle. these are the causative factors for disease. And so there's a very strong preventative component in Ayurveda, so that when we addressing someone that has a disease, has an imbalance, we're not just trying to inhibit a mechanism or the expression of that disease, but we're trying to get to the root cause by changing the very behaviors which brought about that in the first place. And ultimately, as I mentioned before, this is about aligning people to a more naturalistic way of living, a way that supports and maintains a healthy lifestyle and also a healthy diet.
Beautiful. And on that note, what do the doshas play, like what role do they play in creating health or preventing disease? Can you just unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, a lot of people are familiar with this term dosha, and what it means literally in Ayurveda is that which is subject to disturbance or a kind of blemish of the body. And they have their balanced counterparts, and doshas are the imbalanced component. So Vata, for example, the balanced component is prana. For Pitta, it is Agni, and for Kapha, it is Ojas. And so these three components, prana, Agni, and Ojas, represent discrete and distinct functions and activities of the body. So prana relates mostly to the nervous function, Agni relates to digestion and metabolism, and Ojas relates to immune function and the protection of the body. So when those basic components, those homeostatic mechanisms become imbalanced, then they express themselves as doshas. And doshas in Ayurveda basically represent those homeostatic mechanisms, these three primary homeostatic mechanisms that when they get imbalanced, they bring about disease. But we understand these doshas by understanding the manifestation of their qualities. And this is the big difference between a system like Ayurveda and Western medicine. Western medicine is concerned with measurement. It's the quantification of disease. So when you see a doctor does a blood test and gets some kind of quantitative determinant. You know, your cholesterol's too high, your C-reactive protein is too high, your thyroid TSH is too low, giving you hyperthyroidism. So there's all these kind of quantitative determinants. Ayurveda doesn't spend a lot of time trying to measure things. Instead, it tries to understand the quality behind things. Because ultimately, in this life, we experience things through quality. I mean, think about something like love, which is probably the most important experience for all of us to have. At some point in our lives, we need to have that feeling of love just to thrive, to survive. And there's no way for us to quantify love. You don't see people out there with little love-meters going to try to find someone to love. It is a feeling, it's an expression, it's a qualitative state. And when you're feeling well, you know, you're not like, oh, I guess, you know, my oxygen levels are really optimal, you know, my hemoglobin levels are really high, and I guess this level is really high. No, you feel it as a qualitative experience. You just feel good. Or when you eat a meal and you know it's healthy for you, it feels good in your body. So Ayurveda is concerned with the understanding of quality. And so we understand that as it relates to the doshas by appending certain qualitative states to each of the doshas. And this can be quite complex, or I can provide a simplified version. But for example, when Vata is out of balance, it manifests as cold, dry, and light qualities. So whenever you experience those qualities of coldness or dryness or lightness, on any level, it could be on a physical level, it could be on a subtle mental, emotional level. Like if you're feeling dry, you could have dry skin, dry bowels, dry mouth, dry hair, dry eyes. That's all dryness. But also you could feel emotionally dry. You could feel exhausted. You know, think of like a new mom that's at home by herself because her husband goes away on a business trip for a week and she's with the 3 kids by herself. And when he comes back, she's dry. She's been drained. She's exhausted. You know, and she needs some time to regenerate, to juice herself back up. So when you think about these qualitative states like cold, dry, hot, wet, light, heavy, they have a gross manifestation and they also have a subtle manifestation. And we look at everything between those two polarities and everything in between. So we want to just understand what the qualitative state of being is and then apply the correct qualities to counterbalance them, to bring someone back to a state of normalcy. Because normally in Ayurveda, you shouldn't experience doshas. You shouldn't experience Vata, Pitta, Kapha. You should just experience, you know, healthy, bright nervous system, good digestion, and strong immune function. But when you start experiencing coldness, lightness, dryness, heaviness, all these things, then it shows us that the doshas are a little imbalanced and need to be addressed.
Beautiful, Todd. Thanks for sharing that insight with us. And we're here live on the Health Lounge today with Todd Caldecott. We're talking about Ayurveda, Buddhism, and many things in between. So, Todd, you just shared a little bit about doshas, or the fact that we're ideally not experiencing doshas as we go. Can you share a little bit more about the concept of homeostasis and where the body's, if it's constantly coming and returning to, or where we actually sit on the curve? And is that the same for each of the doshas, or is that the same for each of us as we go on our journey, or is that all different?
Well, homeostasis is a scientific term, and it refers to a myriad number of biological mechanisms that are designed to keep us in a state of balance. The body has temperature receptors, chemoreceptors, stretch receptors. It's able to sense changes in hormone levels. And it's a very mechanistic way to look at the body. And it's a valid way to look at the body. But the fact of the matter is that it's all integrated into a complete whole. And we don't experience all of those different mechanisms on an individuated basis. We're not like, oh, my stretch receptors are stimulated here in my stomach, even though you might be feeling full. But it's not like you have this mechanistic understanding. It's just a quality of, oh, I'm feeling full right now. Or likewise, if you're feeling cold, you have temperature receptors which are telling you that. So we can understand it from that mechanistic perspective. And then we become kind of like a computer with all these different sensors. But how do we integrate and understand that into a complete whole and address it in a holistic fashion in a way that makes sense in our lifestyle? When you think about people choosing food in their diet, there's no way to just chemically analyze your diet and then analyze what your body needs chemically and then kind of match them up together. If you're going shopping, it'd be like you have to go through like a phone book worth of information with each food that you got. Trying to correlate that with the database of all the other information that you have and see if it correlates well with what you need. No, what you do is you go through that supermarket, you go through the grocery store, and if your perception is balanced, then you're going to be choosing things that qualitatively feel good to you, that make sense to you. Unfortunately, what happens here in the West, because of this relative abundance that we experience and all of the prepackaged junk foods that are being marketed to us, we kind of lost our understanding of those intuitive relationships with food. So people have cravings for certain foods, but those cravings are often expressions of some kind of imbalanced relationship. There's some kind of important thing to acknowledge behind that craving, like say someone's craving sweet foods. They're just, oh man, I need something sweet. Well, that can tell us a lot of things about what imbalance is going on. It could mean that they're not getting enough sweetness in their life. They're not getting enough hugs. They're not getting enough affection. They're not taking enough time to nourish and nurture themselves. And so, it's a lot easier just to have a chocolate bar or a bowl of ice cream while you're sitting in front of the television at night instead of giving yourself those things. So we need to make sure we elevate our consciousness around these things. So we're not just going to this sort of the lowest common denominator. We've lowered the bar quite a bit in our modern industrialized society. Make sure that we give ourselves what we need. So that sweetness could also be that we're just not nourishing ourselves properly, not just on an emotional basis, but also physically as well. We need to make sure that we're eating the right foods that fill our body with good energy so that we can experience that kind of loving energy. Because when you're depleted and exhausted, when you're not getting what you need, pretty hard to feel that loving quality. So, I definitely work on the Western model, but when I'm communicating to patients, I speak on this qualitative basis because I think that's what people best understand about their lives.
What's some advice, Todd, in terms of that conversation you just brought to our attention, which is a really good conversation, because I'm sure many people listening to this, whether it's live right now or on the replay, will be asking that question. Like there's some times where it's like, oh, my body just feels like this, which may be a block of chocolate or it may be a glass of wine or some things, and it feels good to eat and it feels great to have it versus, the food that's maybe a more healthy option. How do we tell between the two? Because if both of them qualitatively feel good, how do we navigate that? Where's the starting point for everybody listening right now?
Well, none of us are born with an instruction manual. You buy a piece of electronic equipment at the store and you get an instruction manual about how to use it, parameters of its operation. We don't have anything like that, except we have something like Ayurveda. So this is what Ayurveda exists for. There's a whole component of Ayurveda called dinacharya, which means to follow the day. It refers to the daily rhythm of living. So what you do in your life from the moment that you wake up till the time that you go to bed, not in terms of the specific things, but the basic rhythm and flow of your day. And it's important for us to know that, because if we don't have some kind of standard by which to compare our modern life, then we're just kind of randomly grasping in the dark for inspiration. And I think this is the basis for a lot of the recommendations that we see that in the media that are supposedly have a science-based orientation, but are ultimately just kind of random little bits of information that are people trying to fit into a unified whole. So I think it's important to have some kind of baseline of understanding about how to live and how to support the body. Because there's so much confusion out there. And as I said, the media often just serves to facilitate and foment that confusion because, confusion sells papers. I mean, it sells not anymore, but it sells content, if people knew how to live, then they wouldn't be interested in all these different lifestyle magazines and all this different, I consider a lot of it just kind of fluff and nonsense. They would get to what are the 5 things you need to do to live healthy today? It's like, well, there's more than 5 things, It's a little more sophisticated, but you need to have that background in order to understand that. So you need to have this baseline. And then once you have this baseline, then you can kind of make these comparisons. Like a glass of wine, for example. Interestingly, Ayurveda talks about consuming wine and alcohol, its virtues, its demerits, potential problems like alcoholism that can arise from it. But it talks about wine as being an acceptable thing for people to consume who lead this life as a householder. People that have a family and they have a job and they have these responsibilities is not meant for people who are sannyasins, people who go off and meditate in a cave, who are taking a spiritual vow, because it would interfere with that. But, if you're living this everyday life, then what Ayurveda says, what's the point of this life if you can't enjoy a glass of wine every once in a while? But what's the reason for it? The reason is to just give us a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of freedom from those everyday pressures, But we need to understand that there's such a thing as too much wine that would cause a myriad number of issues, and also there's potential contraindications as well. So, in Ayurveda, everything potentially can be used either as a medicine or in some contexts can be used as a food. We just need to understand how it best applies to you and your particular needs. That's ultimately what we're trying to do in Ayurveda, is orientate it towards the individual, what they need.
We're here today live on the Health Lounge with Todd Caldecott talking about Ayurveda and everything else around that topic at the moment. If you haven't yet taken the health type test, go ahead, healthtypetest.org. Find about your type and things that are healthy for your unique body, which integrates Ayurveda and many other these great conversations. So, Todd, thank you so much for joining us here today. Fascinating conversation that we're having right now. I'd just love to unpack a little bit about this notion, as in the world out there, so in the body in here, and maybe look at how Ayurveda approaches that, and maybe some connection between nature, our environment, and our body's physiology. Could you just explore that for a few minutes with us?
Sure. Well, I can talk about an issue I think that is of great importance for us, and that is the fact that cancer rates are now climbing to be the #1 cause of mortality. I mean, it used to be heart disease, and now we're seeing that cancer is beginning to overtake it. So it depends on where in the world, but certainly it's up there. It's in the top 1 or 2 causes of mortality. This is actually, if you factor out medication problems, like, in fact, one of the major causes of mortality in North America is actually physician-prescribed medication in hospitals. It kills a lot of people, and even more so outside of a hospital setting. So that's a big issue that needs to be addressed. It's usually not factored into the conversation, so I'm not going to talk about that specifically. But let's talk about something like cancer. It's become a ubiquitous issue. I think it's pretty hard to find someone nowadays who has not been touched in some way by cancer. They themselves, their spouse, family member has had cancer. And when we think about what cancer is, I mean, cancer basically are a group of cells in your body that no longer resonate at the same biological frequency as the rest of your body. When you think about all the cells in your body, they're all functioning as a cohesive whole. They're all part of a unit. They're part of a team. Well, cancer represents an destruction to that. There are a group of cells that no longer recognize that. Essentially, cancer is introduction of the element of chaos into an organized system. And when we look at our modern lives and we look at the way we're living, there are so many examples on a macrocosmic level that demonstrate where this chaos comes from. I mean, even if you look at what cancer cells do, group of cancer cells do, they start to grow and divide. They start sending out blood vessels to interrupt the proper supply of nutrition to the surrounding cells so that they can get more nutrition for themselves. And then they just sort of dump out their wastes into the surrounding tissues, which impairs their function as this group of cells gets bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually killing the organism. I just got back from India recently, and I was, flying over many countries. And when you look down on the earth from an airplane and you look at a city, it looks remarkably similar to a cancer cell or a group of cancer cells within a tissue, and the behavior is essentially the same. This city is absorbing nutrients and producing all this waste and just discharges it into the local biota without any concern for the health of that ecology, ultimately threatening its own survival. So when we look at the way humans are relating to the earth itself, how they're behaving like how we're behaving like a group of rogue cells that don't see it as part of a continuous integrated system, we are manifesting that imbalance within our own bodies, because we can't deny the fact that our bodies are a part of the earth. We are a part of the earth, and yet we behave like we're not. And so I really think that much of the impetus behind cancer, I think cancer's always been with us. I'm not saying that cancer doesn't exist without this, but it exists in much, much lower rates. Like if you look at the archaeological record, you look at our Paleolithic ancestors who lived to the 7th decade, they did not have cancer like we have. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. So these rising, increasing rates of cancer are very much linked to the way humanity is living on this earth. And we bear those scars on our own bodies because we are cells of this earth. So we're no different. So I think that a system like Ayurveda that teaches us to align ourselves with natural rhythms and cycles, that encourage us and tells us it's important and vital to maintain a healthy awareness of our ecology and to have a healthy relationship with the earth itself, is a very important lesson for us in the modern age.
Todd, thank you for sharing all the wisdom and insight that you are today with all of us. We really appreciate the insight and the perspective that you come from. Todd, I just want to explore the concept of food as medicine, because that's something that you're a big proponent of and a big supporter for. And I want to particularly just ask about that. Like, obviously, we've discussed and explored the fact that different foods are right for different people at different times. What about the difference between, as you shared, like a preventative basis versus a curative basis? So how does that change in Ayurveda, or how does that change with someone who may be sitting on the couch listening to this and they're in a good state of health, they don't have any symptoms or disease, and someone who's listening to this with cancer right now? How does that change in Ayurveda, or how does that change with what we should eat or not eat at any point in time?
Well, that's saying that we are what we eat. You could sort of extend that further by saying we are what we eat, but we are also that which we don't eliminate as well. So it's important to make sure that there is this healthy balance between nourishing the body and then eliminating those wastes that naturally build up. I know this is considered to be a controversial topic within the field of medicine, but it shouldn't be, because it's well established that the body produces all kinds of wastes and has to go through a number of different stages of detoxification to remove them. And so health is an ongoing challenge for all of us. Even if you might be experiencing a good state of health at this current moment, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some change, because you can bet on it. There is going to be some change which is going to represent some disturbance to that homeostatic imbalance. And so it's always important to make sure that we are employing preventative measures. Because ultimately, this body is just a vehicle, and we want to make sure we can operate our vehicle with ease this is essentially what disease represents, right? We can no longer move in our bodies with comfort. And then instead of having the mental and emotional energy to devote to something else, it could be our work, it could be some creative pursuit, it could be charity work. Instead, we're worried about our body. We're focusing all this energy on the discomfort that we're experiencing. And so in order to prevent that, we need to implement some kind of preventative regimen. And that's where the food as medicine component definitely comes in. For someone that has a disease like cancer, cancer isn't a disease that just happens. Most types of cancers are chronic diseases. They take a long time to develop, and they're only caught typically, towards the middle and the end. Few cancers are caught, early enough at a stage when sometimes they can even be reversed. So when you're dealing with something like cancer, you're dealing with a lot of inertia within a system, within a person. And just diet alone isn't going to be enough to shift that. And so we definitely are going to need to implement some kind of therapeutic regimen. And this is where all the wonderful medicines that we utilize in Ayurveda that are actually really effective in treating problems like cancer and other diseases come into play. So food as medicine is for everybody. Food as medicine is mostly preventative. And in some cases, it can be actively therapeutic. But when there are diseases that have such inertia, we will need to use medication along with that. But a diet in cancer obviously is very important, but it's not going to promote changes in weeks. It's going to be changes over months that we're going to start to see some sustained improvement. But some conditions, for example, like incipient diabetes or cardiovascular disease, these respond really well to dietary changes. And in fact, diet is usually the cause of them, apart from usually a lack of movement and exercise. So if we address those two components, food definitely can be therapeutic.
We're here today on the Health Lounge with Todd Caldecott. Todd, thank you for sharing all that you are today with us. If you haven't yet taken the health type test, go to healthtypetest.org, find out which type you are and the things that can help keep you healthy and happy and rebalanced. Todd, just wanted to explore digestion. So we just talked about food as medicine, food that goes in our mouth. Once it actually goes in, the next part of that is digestion, right? Can you share a little bit about digestion, which is one of the sort of core topics of Ayurveda as well, being the root of health? How can we all establish proper digestion in our system to help ward off illness and disease from coming? Is that the same for everybody? Is it different? And for those listening at home right now, where's a good starting point for us here?
Okay. Well, just like we were talking about homeostasis, to understand digestion from an anatomical, physiological perspective and pathological perspective is a very interesting, diverse, and complex topic that probably for most of your listeners is beyond their ability to completely comprehend, and even then is a evolving, shifting paradigm. So once again, when I'm talking to patients, I try to communicate something that they can understand intuitively and can inform their behavior and their decisions. So Ayurveda says that digestion, the manifestation of digestion, is a fire-like agency called Agni. And Agni actually in Hinduism is a god. And it's a god that has to be propitiated in order to communicate to the other gods. So that if you wanted to conduct some kind of ritual to communicate to a god in Hinduism, you use fire, you light a candle, you light some incense, you activate your intention through fire. Well, in the same way, we have this fire that rests within us, and unlike the symbolic fire that we light when we're lighting a candle or burning some incense, we actually have a physical fire within us that mediates our capacity to receive abundance. So people might go to a temple and pray, please make my son a doctor or whatever. But, we can only receive abundance through the digestive system. If you don't have any food, you're not going to be around for very long. That's the first most important issue to address, is maintaining proper nutrition, and that's mediated through our own digestive fire. Well, if we understand digestion like a fire, and if you've ever operated a wood stove or worked with a fireplace or started a fire on the beach, then you have all of the basic tools that you need to understand how digestion works in the body. It's a fire, it's a flame, and it's very easy to snuff that fire out by putting the wrong type of fuel. let's say you just started a fire and then you come over the big chunk of wood and you put it on the fire, poof, it puts the fire right out. Likewise, you can't take a match to a log and hold it and expect it to catch flame. It's not going to happen. You have to enkindle that digestive fire. And so that's consuming foods which are light and easy to digest. So when you're starting a fire, you use little bits of paper, little bits of dry kindling, and you get that going, you blow on it. But you're not in such a hurry to start throwing big pieces of wood on there. You've got to wait until that fire is properly established. So it's the same thing with our own digestive fire, that we want to activate that fire by using the right type of fuel and make sure that we're only introducing heavier, denser fuels when that fire is ready for it. But what I said about the Agni, the digestive fire, being a god is important because your digestion has a spiritual agency as well. It also is reflective of the fire of the mind. You know, we're not just digesting food, we're also digesting sensory information. So our it's like an octave higher than our physical digestion. Our brain is digesting sensory phenomena. Well, if you're distracted while you're eating, you know, if you're on the computer, if you're on your cell phone, if you're driving, then you're not harmonizing these two agencies, the digestive fire and this subtle mental fire. And in fact, it will distract from your Agni's ability to digest the food. So one really important component in Ayurveda, and it's there in the classical texts that go back 3,000-4,000 years, is that when you're eating, you need to eat in an engaged, quiet, mindful fashion. You know, eating is not a time for boisterous activity. It's not a time for, you know, physical exercise. It's not a time for distraction. It's an amazing act which is happening. You're taking the food that's there on your plate and you are transforming it into the very substance of your body. So if you just ponder that, it's an amazing activity which is happening. You are creating yourself in this process. And this is what I mean about it being like a spiritual exercise. In fact, Ayurveda says eating is a yagya. It's a spiritual discipline. It's a spiritual exercise. And just like if you are a Catholic, you know, and you're going to be receiving communion, and, you know, and you step forward to the priest and, you know, he wants to put the communion in your mouth, and you're like, hang on, I got to finish this on my phone here. All right. Okay, thanks. And then you go off. What would be the point of doing that? What would be the point of doing that? You'd be spending all that time in line and receiving the communion for nothing. You wouldn't have received any benefit from that. Not the same benefit that someone who is a devout Catholic, you know, is meditating, praying on receiving this blessing. You know, they would be getting the benefit from that. But it's the same thing with your food. That's just a model. When you eat your food, you're getting this benefit. So if you're not mindfully engaged in that activity, being aware of how brightly or how weakly your fire is burning, and then eating the correct foods to adjust to that, then you're basically digging your own grave, essentially. Because you're snuffing out the very agency which is there to support your life.
We're here on the Health Lounge live with Todd Caldecott right now, having an incredible conversation about Ayurveda, about Buddhism and everything in between. Todd, you've just shared a little bit about and opened the door, I guess, for some mindfulness practices. And I just want to explore that just for a minute with you. You've studied Buddhism and meditation in India and Sri Lanka. To understand, how can we actually bring the concepts of mindfulness or meditation into our daily lives, and what would be the benefit of doing those for those listening right now?
Well, you know, there are so many things that distract us that if we don't have mindfulness, what happens is that we end up finding ourselves down a road in a situation that we might have better thought that we shouldn't have gone down that road. So when a thought arises within you, it's like a little seed, and then you can give that seed energy, and then if you're not aware, what happens with that seed, pretty soon it grows into a jungle of thoughts, and then you're impelled to do something. And you really see this when you're meditating, because we're constantly being bombarded with thoughts. You're in meditation, everything's going well, you're focusing on your breathing, and then your neighbor comes home and you can hear them park their car and slam their car door, and they go inside the house, and then you're like, oh, they're probably coming back from work, and oh, they probably went shopping. I need to go shopping. Oh, then we need more of this. Oh, but I don't have enough money. Oh, now I need to get a better job. And oh, but my mother never gave me the support I needed. And all of a sudden, you have this huge jungle of thoughts. and then you call up your mother later on, you're like, ah, and you quit your job or whatever you do, sometimes those things you might need to do. But if we're not mindful, what we find is that we're not in charge of the direction that we're going in life. And then we're compelled by thoughts, which are really just random bits of information or thoughts or feelings. And we really need to consider the impact of those things in a mindful way, because very often those thoughts aren't even ours. They're implanted by someone else. They're conditioned by society. We're told that we should feel a certain way, so we feel a certain way, but we don't really even think about whether we should feel that way because we haven't really even checked in with how we are feeling from that mind perspective. So mindfulness allows us to witness our consciousness. And witnessing is really important, a tool to give us the power to make informed, intelligent decisions. Essentially, what we're doing is we're activating the higher levels of our consciousness by being mindful. And I know where we're so intellectually driven in the West to achieve and to have purpose, sometimes mindfulness can seem like counterintuitive to that. But actually, what mindfulness does is it removes obstructions to the free flow of consciousness and allows us to really create the kind of life that we want to have instead of the one that we thought we wanted, but maybe that really wasn't what we wanted. It was just what someone else wanted, or it was just what we were told what we should do. It was just what we reacted to instead of really thinking about it and contemplating the full dynamics of that. So mindfulness really just creates space for ourselves in our life, and especially in our modern life when there's so many things vying for our attention that increasingly our inner space is getting more and more cramped. So mindfulness is a way to counteract that influence and create larger inner space to give yourself a greater degree of inner freedom.
Todd, thank you for all that you've been sharing with us today. Fascinating information. If you had one message that you could share with the entire world, if you could shout it from the rooftops and you had one thing to say, what would you share with everyone right now?
Well, there's so many. When I talk about food as medicine, in my book, Food is Medicine, I talk about all the different techniques and practices that are inspired by tradition, that are informed by modern science, that we can employ to nourish ourselves, to heal our bodies. And it's all really important. But in the epilogue, what I say at the end of Food is Medicine is that eating itself is an act of communion. You're communing with nature. You're a part of nature. And what I see in my practice are a lot of single people struggling, trying to find nourishment, trying to find connection. And we can't separate the fact that food is communing with our environment, but also there's this need to commune with each other. And I think one of the biggest things that I see affecting us, particularly here in the West, is the issue of disconnect and loneliness. And we have these diseases like anxiety and depression, which have almost become like a pandemic in some areas. It affects so many people. And I just got back from India and Nepal, and I just look at the way people engage with each other and the level of familial context that they maintain. How even when two men are talking to each other, they'll hold hands. Not because they're gay, which is what someone might hear in the West, and there's nothing wrong with being gay, but a lot of men would be like, all right, hold hands, But it's this reaching out, it's this desire for connection. And I think that we're really lacking this in the West. And so one of the biggest messages I really want us to confront, or issues I want to confront, is this issue of loneliness and disengagement. I think it's so important for us to reinvigorate our notion of what community is, which, in the 21st century isn't sort of a narrow traditional limitation. It can be lots of different things. But having people that you regularly engage with, and especially I want to put this message out there to men. Men lack this more than women, because women naturally engage and create community much more easily than men do. And especially as men get older, I think what happens is that more and more they get disconnected, especially here in the West. And I think that we kind of see that. We can see it evident in some of the politics that are happening, this sense of exclusionism or isolationism, and this, this notion of being separate and independent. None of us are separate and independent. We're all interdependent. We're all cut from the same cloth. We're all from the same earth. And so one of the things I think we really need to focus on is this reestablishing these community connections with each other. So, find a way to connect with people in your life in a real, authentic way. Just take that time in a mindful way, not just to talk about the weather and then move on. And not necessarily talking about heavy topics, but just holding the space for creating connection. It's an internal awareness of opening your heart up to others. Not opening up to injury. You always need to protect yourself, but you want to make sure that you're opening up that heart to create connection, because ultimately that heart connection is what is nourishing you.
Todd, thank you so much once again.
Okay, namaste.
Thank you so much for joining us, for supporting this gathering of world experts, thought leaders, and innovators looking to change the course of the health and wellness of the human race, and for being empowered and actively committed to your own health in mind, body, and spirit. I'm Matt Riemann, and on behalf of all of us at the Personal Health Summit, we thank you for tuning in, and we wish you the utmost personal health and happiness in every day of your life.